What's going on, Lions fans? Welcome to the Pride Detroit YouTube channel. I'm Miko, joined by my guy Morgan here. And Morgan, it's a pretty gloomy day here in Michigan. It's been thunderstorming like the last few days. It's been rough. I was losing power on Saturday, and from the sound of like what I've heard over at your place, it sounds like the storm has kind of hit you at this point.
Yeah, man, the storm hit at least the east side of Detroit about 10 minutes ago. It's starting to roll, so hopefully it clears out in a minute. But yeah, definitely a gloomy day. But thank goodness for indoor practice fields, right? Although it was probably nice earlier in Allen Park when the Lions had to go through
Yeah, I was
OTAs.
gonna
But
say it was a much nicer day. I mean, it was still kind of like cloudy, but a nice day nonetheless. And so we're still at this point in the offseason where, like you said, the Lions are going through their voluntary OTAs. This is the second week of voluntary OTAs. Hopefully, we'll be able to get Jeremy back onto the show at some point in time this week to kind of give us another recap of OTAs this past week. But this is a long process, Morgan, right? Like, obviously right now there's some voluntary OTAs, but eventually we're going to get to training camp. And by the time we get to training camp, this ramp up is going to be at its peak, right? When it comes down to competition, mainly with the guys who are either at the bottom of the roster hoping to get a roster spot, or for those guys that maybe are jockeying for a position to be a starter, or again at least hoping to be second on the depth chart or even third on the depth chart. And so what we wanted to do in this video is kind of look at some of the most important camp battles that could be taking place as we start to ramp up towards training camp. So there's a couple different positions that we could look at. But again, I think this is one of the best parts of the offseason is to kind of see, which players are going to kind of ascend to a new spot on the roster and which players may, be in a fight.
yeah, for sure. And no one's going to be guaranteed a spot. This coaching staff is obviously made up of former players, right? So they look at things a certain kind of way. These guys are going to prioritize competition at every level, right? That's what pushes and makes everyone better. That whole tired saying of iron, iron sharpens iron, or however you want to phrase it. But yeah, there's a lot, because the roster is where it is now after, Brad Holmes being here 3 years. There's going to be competition all over, because no longer can you just do one thing well on this roster and expect to make the roster just because of that. You're going to have to do, if you're not Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell, Aiden Hutchinson, you're going to have to play special teams, and you're going to have to do a myriad of different things to round out the entire roster. So yeah, it's going to be there's going to be so much to watch, especially towards the back end of the roster. And then, like you said, Miko, some of these positions like that are up for starters right now. So there's going to be an open competition for several spots, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So without further ado, let's kind of jump into this list. And the first position that I know my eyes kind of gravitate towards is the defensive tackle position. Now, obviously, this is not one of those camp battles that's going to be for a starting spot. The Lions have DJ Reader. They have Aleem McNeil. Those two guys are absolutely guaranteed a spot on this roster, and they're going to play a heavy amount of the snaps for this defense. But at the same time, Morgan, you and I both know defensive tackles get rotated out fairly consistently. And the Lions are going to have some, really important decisions to make on who's going to be those possible D tackle 3, maybe even D tackle 4 positions on this roster. And when you start to look at the likes of Broderick Martin, Levi Onwuzurike, and newly drafted defensive tackle Mekhi Wingo, I think that's a very interesting camp battle that you have there, because you have a little bit of a staggering there, right? Levi was drafted, the same year that Penei Sewell was, second round draft pick, has kind of struggled to find his footing. Broderick Martin was drafted last year as a bit of a developmental project. And then you have Mekhi Wingo coming in as a later round draft pick, but with a lot of interesting intangibles. That's a position group that I could really see, the position battle being very interesting throughout camp.
Yeah, and when they're all at their best, they are going to bring something unique to the table. Like Levi was drafted out of Washington, like you said, Miko, in that 2021 draft, because he was he was going to get inside and he was going to mess things up, man. He could knife through gaps. He could blow up the A gap. It just depended on, what down and distance, but he could make plays, against the pass and against the run. Remember during that press conference, he said he wanted to come in and F stuff up a couple different times. Like, there was tape out there. Like there was a reason Brad Holmes wanted to trade up for him, but sadly, back injuries and other things have played a part. But we'll see what he brings to the table. Broderick, we really haven't seen much, to be really honest with you guys. And people have already said his body looks different, but it's his body looks different season. Everyone knows that, right? So
yeah,
he'll be one to watch. And I really like Mekhi Wingo, Miko. I think he has tape out there in the SEC. He rocked that. It's 15 for them, right?
Yeah.
For LSU, 15 at LSU. Yeah, it means a lot. So I like Mekhi Wingo, and he's undersized, but this regime doesn't care if you can get in there and make plays alongside, Reeder or Lee McNeil, depending on the personnel, then they're going to play you.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's going to make, again, finding that defensive tackle depth really interesting, or even maybe challenging for those three guys, is that the fact that you still have a Josh Paschal and you still have a John Kaminsky on the roster, and those guys are known to kick inside on certain downs and distances, and that's part of the reason why you look back at last season, both Levi and Broderick kind of had a couple games where they weren't activated because they just weren't needed for those games, but the Lions don't have that same type of depth that they had a season ago. So again, I think that's kind of what makes this an interesting camp battle.
Yeah, and that's how you have to think of it, guys, because you make an excellent point, Miko, with Paschal and Kaminsky, because depending on the situation, like if it's 3rd and 9 and the Lions are trying to get off the field, the personnel could very well look like Aiden Hutchinson at an edge, James Houston at an edge, Aleem McNeil and Paschal or Kaminsky for your 4 rushers. And that could be the look, not all the time, but a good chunk of it, just because you're getting your best pass rushers on the field and putting them in favorable matchups. Because we've talked about it before, guys like Paschal and Kaminsky can be effective on the edge. They can set an edge against the run. They can provide some pocket push just by trying to run through the chest of the blocker and, at least walking them back, condensing the pocket. But against tackles, they don't really, not yet at least, have the skill set to beat some of the premier tackles in the game. But if you kick them inside, where, interior offensive linemen typically aren't as adept at pass blocking as tackles are. That's just the way the specialty, that's how positions shake out. But yeah, then that's how they make their hay. Then Josh Paschal is, and Kaminsky all of a sudden are maybe plus pass rushers at the 3 technique, and that's how you have to start looking at it, not just what they're labeled on the roster, if that makes sense.
No, 100%. And so moving from defensive tackle and staying on the defense side of the football, so we just talked about, again, these are some positions that are more so in the reserve situation or reserve category. Let's move to some guys that may be jockeying for a starting position, or at least a larger chunk of the starting snaps on the defensive side of the football. And that's looking at linebacker, and specifically looking at the likes of Jack Campbell and Derek Barnes. This was a really interesting camp battle even last year, Morgan, because Jack came in obviously as a first round draft pick with a lot of, again, intangibles, was very athletic, a lot of rave reviews on just, his intelligence and things like that. But Derek Barnes had ascended to another level last season, and that kind of kept Jack Campbell at bay. But so far, what we're hearing, again, early in the offseason program, but what we're hearing so far, even out of Aaron Glenn, is that Jack has made a lot of improvements both to his body and to just how he approaches the game. This could, once again, be another one of those really interesting camp battles that could literally last to the end of training camp leading into week 1 as far as who is the true, starting Mike linebacker for the Lions.
I love this, Miko, because this is, there was a couple years ago where the Lions linebacker room was debatably their worst, their weakest area of the roster, maybe like 2021, really.
Yeah.
But then now you look at it and it is razor sharp, man. Like your 5th linebacker is probably Malcolm Rodriguez. Then you have Jalen Reeves-Maben, and then in any order, Barnes, Anzalone, and Campbell, right? And they all do different things. I think you can, at this point where we're at, and he's been phenomenal, you can probably pencil in Anzalone as the starter at the will, right? Yep. And we're going to talk about this in base personnel. So base personnel these days, really, guys, is the nickel, where you have that extra defensive back on the field in place of the linebacker. So I really do. That's going to be a really good battle because I think you have Anzalone there at the wheel, and then it's going to be Campbell and Barnes competing for that mic. And, like we talked about, Meko, even if it is Campbell getting the lion's share of snaps at Mike, they're going to find ways to get Barnes on the field and vice versa because they both played well last year. They used them a bit out of position, although Derek Barnes, man, on the edge, that's what he used to do. So
yeah,
that'd be
I was gonna say him on
fun.
the edge or him just rushing the passer again on again sending him on blitzes is something that he was a little more adept at. It came a little more natural to him than it did Jack Campbell. So like you're saying, it does give you that level of versatility between your linebackers of, again, Anzalone may be a mainstay on the field a lot of the time, getting a higher chunk of the snaps. But again, maybe we do continue to see Jack and DB kind of just continue to rotate out. But it's going to be interesting to see. Like I said, DB last year had a lot of took the majority chunk of snaps. But maybe we see that kind of flip this year.
Yeah, and Barnes has a ton of tools. That's the thing, too. He's really fast. He's very, very physical. Like you see him make tackles, you're like, oh yeah, that was Barnes. You can tell pretty quickly. But Campbell, man, is like a alien linebacker. Like I think he was, I don't know the number, but he was 8th of like 2,000 some linebackers in relative athletic score by Kentley Platty of all time. So since he's been doing it and computing it, so. If Campbell starts putting it together from a mental standpoint, and he did at Iowa, that's just another level in the NFL. He's going to be able to. He might be one of the better linebackers in football. Like that's the ceiling for Campbell is like maybe a Luke Kuechly, like at some point. Like that's the ceiling. He might not get there, but that's the ceiling.
Yeah, and that's a scary thought, right? To have that caliber of linebacker a part of this defense, and just how good they could potentially be. Let's jump over to the offensive side of the football because the rest of this list after this next position is defense. But we've kind of talked about it in passing. We've been talking about it since the draft for sure. And that's that's RB3 for this Lions team. Craig Reynolds has pretty much manned that position and kind of a little bit unchallenged the last few years, Morgan. In terms of, again, the Lions have always had, their 1-2 combo, whether it was Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift, or last year it was Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Craig Reynolds has always been somebody that they can count on, and he does every little detail that you could possibly ask of from a running back who's in that position. He plays special teams. He's willing to make the tough blocks, and he can still come in there, in a pinch and provide solid running. But the Lions did draft a rookie that I believe could really challenge him for that spot. Not saying that he's necessarily a better running back than Craig Reynolds, but I think he could be more versatile all around than Craig Reynolds. And then there's a favorite of yours, Bam Knight, who the Lions really seemed to like last year, got hurt and wasn't able to fully compete for that RB3 spot. Again, this is another group that could be really interesting to watch throughout camp to see, if Craig once again kind of runs away with it, or do one of these other guys, kind of pull the rug out from underneath him.
This is tough. I think the Lions have at the top, obviously, you have Ja and David Montgomery for probably the best running back duo in football for my money. This roster is just so crazy. But yeah, I love Craig, and the team does. You think back to Hard Knocks, right? Like when they had that conversation, and they're like, "Hey," I think it was Deuce. They're like, "Everybody loves Craig." Like,
yeah, like you guys are pissed off offensive lineman.
Yeah,
cut Craig.
Yeah, I think Hank Fraley has vouched for him, like for one of the best offensive line coaches in football. So yeah, Craig's going to be tough to unseat, but like you said, Meko, Vaki has juice, man. We talked about his missed tackles on carries, and it was like 20 something on 42 carries, which is insane. So that's going to be tough. And we know Vaki's going to be a core special teamer. Craig contributes on special teams, but Vaki can be, a gunner potentially and return kicks at some point. Who knows? I
can just kind of see him like being incorporated into like some of these trick plays as well. Like there's a lot of potential with Vaki. But go ahead, as you were saying.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, man. So that's very intriguing, and Craig is like one cut runner. Like he's going to get what's blocked for him. He might break a tackle or two there. We talked about what kind of blocker he is. We talk about Vaki breaking tackles, and then Bam Knight is a tough runner, man. Who, again, I think offers a little bit more like wiggle and juice. Once he's past the second level than potentially Craig does. But I know it's going to be tough, like you said, to unseat. Whenever I think of Craig now, I think of that block in Tampa Bay, the first time the Lions beat Tampa Bay, and yeah, that's fun to think about.
Yeah, Craig Reynolds at this point, it's still tough to completely imagine him being, not on this roster come week one. But at the same time, like I said, this is what makes that group so interesting to watch, because I think there's some legitimate competition. And this is not a slight at any of the other guys that have been competing against Craig the last few years, but it's just, like you said, whether it's Bam Knight, who has, produced in this league, or someone like Sione Vaki, who just seems to have this raw, untapped potential. That's what's going to make this group a little more interesting to watch. But let's once again pivot back to the defense. This is kind of a sneaky battle that I don't think a lot of people are focused on, but I know I'm going to be tuned into personally, seeing as it's my favorite position on the football field, and that's safety. And it sucks that it's going to be a camp battle, because I love both of these players probably as close to equal as I could possibly get. But the battle between Ifeatu Melifonwu and Brian Branch for that second safety spot opposite Kirby Joseph is going to be very interesting, because I think both of these players this past season proved that they need to be on the field. Like the Lions absolutely should have both of these guys in the field. It just becomes a matter of, do the Lions see Brian Branch more as a safety this season, or do they feel like Ifeatu Melifonwu proved enough to man that safety spot for an entire season?
Yeah, and this is where it's fun to think about things from like different perspectives, right? Like, is Ifeatu, do you want to keep Brian Branch at nickel? Because then obviously that opens it up wide open for Melifonwu to command that other safety spot next to Kirby. I don't think they're going to move Kirby. I know people have kind of swayed a little here and there with his but Kirby's not moving, in my opinion. So yeah, you look at it that way. Like, do they want to keep Melifonwu like on the field, or like do they want to put Brian Branch at safety? Do they think like having Branch and Kirby back there like creates a lot of problems? And I think it does. I think that creates a lot of problems. And I really like Melifonwu. And to be clear here too, guys, like I still think they get Melifonwu on the field a lot, like similar to how we were talking about with Derek Barnes or Campbell. Like, yeah, Brian Branch is one of those players. He's either going to start at nickel or safety. Like it's one of the other. This is the conversation here we love Brian Branch, everybody. Don't get mad at us, but we're just playing it with it here, like with how they're going to think about it, because you could do this several different ways, right, Miko?
Yeah, and that's why I think it's one of the more unsung camp battles that's going to be taking place, because I think there's an argument to be made for Brian Branch moving to safety, because again, he played it at such a high level at Alabama, and he clearly has the skill set to be a great safety. But you and I have even said, like, Brian Branch could be all pro at nickel too, though. Like it's not an either or of like, hey, which is he better at? He could be all pro at both. And it really, for me, comes down to this, and it's going to be interesting to see how the Lions see it. Does Brian Branch have to play so well at safety that they're like, he absolutely has to be a safety? Or is it going to be a situation where, like, if he just has to take like a massive step back to where they're like, okay, we can't start him? Because on paper, the potential combination of Carlton Davis, Terrion Arnold, Brian Branch at the nickel, Kirby Joseph, and Ifeatu Melifonwu is a little more appealing to me than that same mix-up, but then you swap in maybe a Meek Robertson at the nickel, or Ennis Rakestraw Jr. at the nickel, and you move Brian Branch to safety. I think if he made so many plays, and not just like in one phase of the game, like he was blitzing, he was run stuffing, he was getting interceptions. Again, this takes nothing away from Brian Branch. I just think like those two players themselves make plays. You want to have as many playmakers as you can on the field. And that's what's going to make this a great camp battle.
I agree. Yeah, you can do it. That's the fun part about this too. And that's, how a testament to how talented this team is, because we're having this conversation and like both of those sides that's very debatable. You could take either side there, and you're making great points, because I don't know, man. And then you start looking at it like, is Rakestraw going to play his way into the conversation like almost Brian Branch did last year? Like they're looking around during coaches meetings like, we can't not play Rakestraw, so we got to figure this out. And then that's where you start. But if that's the case, then I guarantee you, man, they'll be playing a ton of 3 safety looks just to get Melifonwu on the field a lot. And then you got 2 linebackers, and you can mix and match. And Aaron Glenn has shown the ability to do that because he wants to get his players that he knows he can depend on to make plays on the field.
100%. And so let's finish this off with the number 1 camp battle that I think everybody's very intrigued to watch this upcoming offseason. And that's Terrion Arnold versus Amik Robertson at CB2. And I'm going to mention Kendall Vildor, not because I think he actually has a chance at probably winning this battle, but for one, Morgan, Vildor did, come onto this team late last season and man that CB2 spot opposite Cam Sutton. Yes, we all remember the play that he didn't make against Brandon Ayuk in the conference championship game. But for a guy who kind of came off the streets and competed, he didn't do as bad as it looked at times. And so, yeah, Morgan, I mean, that's something that I think Lions fans should at least kind of get somewhat accustomed to, is the likes of Kendall Vildor and even Amik Robertson getting a heavy dose at that CB2 spot early in the offseason. But this is going to probably turn more into a camp battle as the offseason progresses, right?
Yeah, and there's going to be multiple, like you have that going on. You have, it's just, and this is the way this coaching staff operates too, right, Miko? Like they're gonna defer to the vets, like Kendall Vildor or Amik Robertson or even Emmanuel Mosley might initially like get reps at CB2 early on, because this coaching staff, like we said at the top, is made up of former players, and that's the way they would like things done. And so they're doing it now as coaches, because it probably didn't happen all the time as players, because this is a relatively new concept, right, Miko? Like these former guys in the league now being coaches, and some of them aren't far removed. Like Kelvin Shepard played not long ago. So you think about guys like that, and then even Dan and AG aren't that old, depending on who you ask. Like, they're not that old to us, but
right. And I think so to your point, like I think that does make it more likely that this is going to be again a highly contested camp battle between, again, you have what a lot of analysts saw as CB1, in this past draft class, or CB2, depending on, again, who you ask, competing against guys, like you said, Emmanuel Mosley coming off another ACL injury, Amik Robertson, a guy who has proven to be a tough, versatile corner who can play on the outside and play on the inside. And then, like we said, Kendall Vildor is somebody who maybe a lot of people wouldn't contend to be a starting candidate. But again, he did start a good amount of games for this team last year, and now he has an entire offseason to really, get up to speed on this Lions defense and figure out where he kind of fits in. But that's what I think is going to make this very, very contested, because Terrion's going to have to fight for every opportunity he's given. And it's going to be interesting. I'm still waiting to see if Ennis Rakestraw Jr. is exclusively being looked at the nickel, or if he also is going to get kind of in the mix at, again, playing some outside corner as well. That could make that entire secondary between that and the safety group extremely entertaining to watch this entire offseason.
It's super competitive. I love that you made that point with, and Vildor, like, guys, at the end of the day, if Vildor is your CB 5 or 6, that's a good spot to be in. Because he competed. Like, I know he didn't make the play, but he was close to making some others, and I thought he did okay, to be honest with you. Like, he was better than Jerry Jacobs was down the stretch. I know that hurts a lot of y'all to hear, but he was.
I'm right there with you, right? For a dude to come off the streets and to really, again, give you some high quality play, where, again, it wasn't like he was consistently being left in the dust. He was just, again, just a couple things here and there where, again, if that's your CB 5 or 6, or again, some depth, because that is a position that can and possibly will see some injuries during the season. It's nice to have some veteran options there that can go out there and, again, for a game or two, man that outside corner position. So these are just the 5 positions that I think we kind of wanted to highlight as some really interesting position battles to kind of watch throughout camp. Let us hear from you guys, though, in the comment section below. What are some other groups that maybe we didn't discuss that maybe you're like, hey, this is just as interesting, or these are a couple players that are going to be jockeying for position that could be really, interesting to watch. Let us know in the comment section below. And like always, if you're looking for any more Lions content, be sure to check out prideofdetroit.com. We are always uploading new articles over there, as well as over here on the Pride of Detroit YouTube channel, where you can subscribe and hit that notification bell. Both of those things help out this channel immensely. Also, be sure to hit the like button on this video. That helps out the channel as well. But yeah, Morgan, that's pretty much going to do it for this video. So with all that said, I'm Meko. He's Morgan. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch. And we'll be sure to catch you guys in the next video.